Mark, welcome to the Exodus podcast. How's it going?
Thank you, Jake. It's going well. I appreciate you having me. I'm in a little bit
Yeah.
of a different kind of place than I usually am for these. But even though fish are all around me, I'm excited to be talking about whitetails.
Yeah, it is October. I can't imagine talking about fishing right now.
I know it
so
feels very strange. I'm on a MeatEater experiences fishing trip right now, and I'm getting trail camera photos of my shooter bucks moving in daylight, 1,500 miles away, and I can't do anything about it. It's killing me.
isn't that something? Isn't that crazy that we have the ability to be that in tune no matter where we're at, as long as we have signal to know what's
Yeah,
going on and the FOMO is 24/7?
yeah. It's a blessing and a curse.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, you recently released a film, The Wide Nine, and I had a chance to watch that, and it was really felt a lot of the emotion that goes into. I mean, a lot of hunters can relate to the trials and tribulations that you went through with that buck specifically,
Yeah.
um, but you something even just like my earliest days, I remember of listening to Wired to Hunt. I remember Holyfield, and you've kind of whether you realize or not, like you definitely get fixated on a single whitetail, and to see it all come to fruition is obviously really rewarding. And so, like going all the way back to Holyfield versus Wide Nine, how much more were you prepared for a new whitetail saga?
Yeah, well, Holyfield was really the one that I mean, almost the one that started all. There was one buck before that when I first started hunting in this general area. We called him six shooter. That was the first year I ever got to hunt for multiple years, and so that was like my introductory. But then Holyfield was the first deer that, for 3 years, I guess it was, he just schooled me, and I really, looking back on it, didn't really know what I was doing and made a lot of stupid mistakes and did a lot of things that now I would chuckle at. But I learned so much. And I think that is one of the best things about, at least in my opinion, when you choose to target a single deer, every decision is 10x in importance. Every mistake you make is that much more influential because there's no second chances. There's no other deer that might come down the trail. There's no other option. If you mess it up with that deer, you're done for the day. You're done for the week. Or if he's gone, you're done for the season. And so it just forces you to pay attention to the details. I think that's probably the biggest thing that the Holyfield saga drilled into me was the importance of the little things, of that extra 5 yards, of that extra 5 minutes, whatever it is. That can be everything when you're in that kind of situation. And so that was back from 2000, I don't know, 2012 to 2014 or somewhere in that window, give or take. And in the years since Holyfield, a number of things clicked for me, and I started figuring it out on these deer. And so I've been successful on a handful of others that I've had 2 or 3 years of history with. So by the time we got to this deer, the wide nine, um, I had a formula kind of. I had a method basically that I knew I was going to follow to kill this deer. And so that what made this one unique though was that this is the first deer that I've ever had 4 years of information to work with. Never had that, and that's pretty unique where I hunt because I don't own this land that I'm hunting. It's a collection of permissions that I picked up over the years. So there's like an 80 some acre farm that I have permission on. A handful of years later, I got kind of off and on permission on another 20 next to it. A handful of other years later, I've gotten off and on permission on another piece that's to the other side of it. I've had some permission that I don't have anymore in different regions of this square mile. But over the years, I've hunted this zone and hunted different spots in it. And I've kind of learned that there's a couple core zones that bucks will gravitate towards, and you'll have a deer with a personality. You'll have like a north personality or a south personality, and yeah, without going too far down this wormhole, I had some basic puzzle pieces that I knew would be like on the playing mat. Like these were going to be factors, and then I would just have to slowly figure out what's this deer's personality, what are his tendencies. Is he more like Junior, or was he more like G, or was he kind of like that deer Frank, or I had these different like templates that I
Hmm.
had learned over the years. And with the wide nine, I could kind of use those to have a head start and then fill in all of the deer specific information. And then along the way, some crazy things happened, some mistakes I made for some drama and some, you know, just some good old fashioned Mark doing stuff that he wish he hadn't done, and learn from it, and never cease to learn from my mistakes and keep on trying to grow. And fortunately, with this one, I was able to make it all come together in the end.
Yeah, you mentioned, you growing as a hunter and being more refined. What's a key item or two or strategy that changed drastically from the days of Holyfield to the days of White Nine? I mean, do you feel like you're a totally different whitetail hunter or more polished? Or I mean, because there's a lot of guys that hunt a specific deer all year and they do not catch up with them. And then there's some really great hunters that I would hate to be that buck because when they have their number, like it's just a matter of time in reality. And so clearly, like there's a skill gap. And so
Yep.
you had a skill gap at one point, but it has caught up to where you were successful. Like for someone that is trying to get to that point, what are a key element or a key thing that really changed your strategy going into this with a level of confidence?
Yeah. I think the biggest thing is knowing when to shoot your shots. And I don't mean that literally. I mean it figuratively. But when to take your big swing, when to get aggressive, and then being willing to take risks when the timing is right. So I used to be very conservative. So in the Holyfield days, I was obsessed with not educating deer, with not educating Holyfield, with being very, very cautious with when I hunted, where I hunted, how I hunted. And because of that, I saw him. He stayed in the area, but I never could get a shot. In the subsequent years, I continued to be very careful, with my timing, making sure I'm not wasting hunts on poor conditions or bad situations, making sure that I'm still being careful and smart with my strikes. And constantly in data collection mode. So I'm constantly trying to learn about these deer, whether it be actually scouting out there, whether it be with trail cameras, whether it's with long distance glassing, whether it be looking back on what this deer did in past years and finding those annual patterns. I'm constantly collecting all year round. I'm collecting information. And then once the season starts, I typically start kind of an outside in type strategy where I continue that data collection mode, hunting safe stands in the early season that give me visibility into some of these different possible core areas for these bucks. And then I'll just slowly be working around the edges based on wind or based on what this deer is telling me. But what I got wrong in the past and what I have gotten better at doing now is that when the stars align, when you have the right wind or the right set of new intel or the right condition change, a big cold front happens to come through that matches up with when he historically had moved last year and matches up with the fact that I had really close to daylight pictures of him over the last week. And now this front's hitting and it's this annual pattern. Like when those things align, strike and strike hard. Like I don't pussyfoot around anymore. I'm
Mhm.
willing to take big swings. I'm willing to push right into the heart of it. I'm willing to do, aggressive moves. For example, one of the deer that I had hunted for 2 or 3 years that I ended up killing 3 years ago, I called him Junior. And this is a situation where I made a somewhat aggressive move on him into his core area. I'd stayed out of the zone because he had disappeared for about a month. But I knew, based on what he'd done the year before, he disappeared for about a month in 2020. I don't know, it was 2020 or 2021 or 2019, somewhere in that. But past year, he disappeared for most of the month of November and then reappeared on December 3rd. And then from December 3rd for the next couple weeks, he was active, he was daylighting, he was in the area. So when that started happening again in that given year, I was like, oh, hey, he did this last year. I'm not going to go mucking everything up and spooking every doe in the area. I'm going to wait and see if he does what I think he's going to do. And then when December 2nd or 3rd or 4th rolls around, if we've got decent conditions, I'm going to push in there and I bet you he'll be back. Lo and behold, cold front's hitting on December 3rd, right on the annual pattern, right on the date he showed up last year with good cold weather and the right wind. So I'm like, yeah, I'm cutting my Ohio trip short. I'm coming back to Michigan to hunt a Michigan deer. So instead of hunting Ohio where there's all sorts of big deer, coming back to Michigan because I believe in this lining up of factors so much. I go in for that hunt. He shows up. First time I've seen him in a month. I see him. I watch him bed down on the edge of this swamp, out of range. It was gun season at that point, so I did have a rifle with me. And I saw where he laid down, but couldn't get a shot. And he looked like he was injured. He was limping or something. So I wasn't sure what the situation was going to be. And so I remember sitting there and thinking, do I just sit and wait? Do I try to make something happen here? What should I do? And past me, like the Holyfield version of me, would have been so conservative, would have been so worried to do anything. I would have sat there and waited and hoped that miraculously he would have stood up and came out to the field edge and given me a good, easy shot. But the new me, again, recognized like I've got a special opportunity here. The deer I've been after for the last couple of years, I know where he is right now. And he might stand up and walk directly away from me. I've seen that happen so many times, right? These deer don't usually do the thing you want them to do. And he might disappear out of my life forever. But right now, I know where he is. And yeah, trying to make something happen could blow it all up. But now is the time to shoot your shot. And so I decided, and I should clarify, I could see where he was bedded. I could see the top of his head, so I could see what he was doing. I just couldn't get a shot at him. So it was going to be risky to try to get out of the tree stand I was in. But long story short, I decided I had to go for it. So when the wind picked up, I slowly tried to swing to the backside of this tree. I maneuvered my way out of this tree stand and then belly crawled across the field to get over this hill to get within shooting range of him, and ended up getting a shot at him at 40 yards on the ground, in a kind of a wild way that I never would have done years ago.
Mhm.
And similar kind of thing happened with the wide nine, in which ended up seeing where he bedded down. So I mean, it's very similar now that I'm thinking about this out loud. And I ended up having to belly crawl way further this time to sneak up on where this deer was bedded. In a similar thing where like I just knew I've been waiting and waiting and waiting for this moment. He finally arrives. I finally see him for the first time in 4 weeks. And again, it's now or never. And sometimes it's a now or never situation like this one where there was a deer that I had hit earlier, and this is the first time seeing him since then. Or sometimes it's just knowing you've got that right set of conditions where all of the different variables line up. And when that happens, you have to just send it. You just have to be willing to go for it. And yeah, you might screw up 3 times out of 4, or 9 times out of 10. But if you never take that swing, you're going to be the guy or girl that sees a lot of deer, but never kills them. And that's probably been the biggest shift I've made in the last decade or so.
Yeah, I think there's some really great advice or self assessment there because I think everyone at some point throughout their hunting endeavor, they get these kid gloves on where they're like, and they second guess everything. And then I just have a variety of different friends that like you ask them a question like, didn't even think about that. And like they still have success. It's like, okay, so clearly we overanalyze things or there's like maybe a happy medium between those two things. But
Yeah.
the kid gloves thing, like I think we've all been guilty of it. Like, it's like, the whole thing, the whole season. And then at the end of it, you're just like, oh man, I wish I would have been slightly more aggressive.
Yeah.
So that's definitely really good advice. And you mentioned, like specific conditions and a variety of different things. I almost watched the video again and counted how many times the word weather was said because I think that shows how important it is with the very strategic aggression, like from the early October cold fronts, and then just the whole time, and even when the weather, aka wind, was not correct, and that whole debacle there too. But like going into that season, hunting wide nine, it's easy to guess this now, but like, what was your level of confidence of killing that deer on a scale 1 to 10?
7,
Okay.
I think, somewhere in that ballpark. I mean, I would say I felt confident, but I would say the biggest thing is if a neighbor would get him.
Hmm.
I have a lot of confidence in my method now in this area. Um, I know how to hunt these deer, and I know that if I study them enough, if I am smart, if I collect the information, if I work them smart, which I know how to do, I've got a great chance. They're still wild deer. They're still, I mean, maybe 70% is too high, maybe 50-50. But I felt quite confident. It's just a matter of the fact that there's like 64 other hunters in my square mile that
It's
all
crazy.
could get to crack at him too. And literally, that's not like a number I'm pulling out of my butt. There's a lot of other people in the area, and so on any given year, a deer like that could easily get shot by somebody else, and that's a big part of why I do this wait, collect, then strike method versus like strike. If
Mhm.
I were to be super aggressive all the time, these deer would never stick around, and I would never get a chance at a 5-year-old buck in Michigan.
Mhm.
So I have to play this game in which I do a lot of observation. I hunt a lot of observation stands. I sit up on hills and glass from the road and different spots like that, because I just know that there's little windows, and outside of those little windows, you're usually doing more harm than good. At least in this type of situation, where man, if he goes 100 yards that way or 300 yards that way, he's going to get whacked by the next guy.
Mhm.
But if I can keep him feeling very safe in these couple little spots that I know there shouldn't be other people, and then I make sure that he feels tremendously comfortable in those spots that I do have some level of influence on, then when I do make my really aggressive strike, there's a good reason for him still to be there. And so, you know, that's taken a long time to get to that point, though. I mean, when you first started listening to Wired to Hunt, and I was hunting Holyfield or six shooter before that, um, gosh, I made every mistake in the book. And
But you
so,
don't realize it in the moment, right? You think you're doing the right thing.
right. Yeah, you do. And I'd say that you talk to a lot of people, like the legends of our field, the guys who are 20, 30, 40 years older than you and I, who we interview on our podcast all the time. I know Adam Hayes or DeQuisto or Mark Drury or whoever. And a lot of these guys just kind of say, well, I just had a feeling, or I just knew
Yeah.
that was the thing to do. And that intuition, it's not actually that they have some magical quality. It's not that they're special and have some gene or something that you and I don't have or anybody else has. At least from my perspective, I think it is just the aggregate of years and years and years and years and years of making those mistakes that I made and that you've made, and seeing how it pans out, or seeing the opposite, seeing how, oh man, this kind of spot, this good thing happened. This kind of spot, this thing happened. What I see here means X equals Y equals Z, whatever it is. And after you see that and experience that for so many decades, it becomes a sixth sense. It becomes something like, it's like putting on a pair of glasses. And for many years, I mean, I learned to deer hunt from my grandpa and dad, and that was what I had to work with until I was like 20. And that was the basics of, this is a deer trail, this is a rub, this is a scrape, this is deer poop. Those things mean there are deer here. Now sit next to a tree and commence. Like, that was the extent of my education. Um, and then, in college is when I started really doubling down on my own education and figuring it out. And so from that point on, it was, I would go into the woods and I would know all of these things, like that I read in magazine articles or I heard on the TV, or on TV or something back then. But I would go out in the woods and it would still seem like you're reading a really dense mathematics textbook. Like, okay, this I sort of get, this is a formula, but I really know what's going on. Or it was like having really bad glasses on, where you could kind of see the basic shapes, but I couldn't get the details right. And then year after year after year after year, that the prescription of my glasses got better and better and better. And I think another thing that really helped me was that by virtue of some of the different projects I've done for work and some of my own just little adventures I've gone on, I've hunted in a lot of different places now across wildly different habitat types, and learned from a bunch of very different hunters that have very different styles. Excuse me. And I've always been one to say, I want to take information from everybody. I I don't. There's some people that say, "Well, I'm not ever going to learn from Mark Drury because he hunts 4,000 acres of private land, and I hunt public land, and that stuff's not applicable to me at all." Or there'll be somebody who hunts a private managed farm, and they don't want to listen to Dan Infalt or some public land guy because that just doesn't apply to me. That's not at all like what I hunt with them in the southeast or whatever. Um, I have always taken the approach that I want to hear it all. I want to take it all in, and then I'm going to have this filter in which I'm going to pass it all through, and that filter is where I hunt, what my circumstances are, what my goals are, et cetera, et cetera. But there's going to be little bits of all those different approaches that stick for me. And so I went and I learned how to track deer in the snow with a guy in Maine. And I went and I learned how to use water access in Alabama on public land and yada, yada. Went and did all these different things. And where it's left me now today is I feel like I walk into the woods anywhere and I have really damn good glasses on. And it's it's all like, oh, this thing, all these patterns are coming together and they just make sense. And that would not have came from just listening to a bunch of podcasts. It wouldn't have came from watching a bunch of videos. It wouldn't have came from reading a bunch of articles. The only way to get that is that for 20 years now, I've been on my own, you know, mission to try as many things as I can, to learn as many things as I can, and screw up a whole lot. And so I've built up this intuition that Hayes or Mark or any of those guys has. I'm not to their level yet, but I'm developing my own intuition to where I can see clearly out there,
Mhm.
and that just takes repetition.
Yeah. Yeah, that's I had that realization too with a lot of the interviews we have, like where you're exactly right. They have the sixth sense of like now's the time and here's the place and have a high level of success.
Yeah,
And you try to boil that down for myself and for all the listeners, but it is so hard to do so because it is repetition. I feel like every year we all just have to challenge ourselves to get a little bit better, a little bit better. How you mentioned going to all these different locations. I have to ask you this. What do you enjoy more? Hunting a specific deer, high stakes, high odds, boom or bust, like the emotion 10 out of 10, or just rolling up to somewhere random and just going to hunt? Like, because it's two different things in reality because
yeah,
you're hunting a specific terrain or a specific food source or something like that. And you're just like, yeah, we'll pull the lever of luck and see what shows up. What do you enjoy more?
yeah. So it's a tough question, one I've wrestled with a lot, because me and my buddies will spitball about this and stuff, and I really like both. Like I would probably get bored or in some way un discontent if I was stuck with only one of them. Like I really need both for myself. But if I had to choose, it's probably the one-on-one mission. Like I just geek out about it in a different way. I'm very, as you know, very analytical, very strategy minded person. And so the thing that gets my gears turning the most is really diving into the why behind what these deer are doing and how and when, and trying to predict and trying to understand where these little kinks in their armor are. Just that very, it's like a game of chess, and I love that kind of thing. And so I, ask me in 2 weeks or 3 weeks when I'm in the depths of the next one, and he's kicking my butt. Maybe I'll tell you otherwise. Um,
Yeah.
but what I'm trying to get better at, and what I have gotten better at, but still have my moments, is learning to like dive deep into that one-on-one kind of thing that we're discussing, where it is high stakes, where it is high pressure, where it's all those things. But do it in a way that I don't let it take over in a negative way for me, and make me like stressed out and not enjoying it. Because that this is something we've talked about too, which is making sure that you keep the hunt fun, and making sure that you're not getting so obsessed with your goal that it takes away from that, which sometimes I've been guilty of. So
Mm.
last year I had moments where, specifically with the wide nine, when some things went wrong, I like nosedived a little bit on that fun factor, and some of that, like wounding an animal and not finding it is as bad as it gets, and you're just not going to not be upset about that. But all the other things, at least trying to get better at that, and honestly, one of the best things for me with that has been the perspective shift I've had with having kids. Now, whenever something goes bad with a hunt, where in the past I would have gotten so stressed out and so worked up about it, I've just realized that, gosh, in the big scheme of things, these deer don't matter at all. I mean, my hunt, for one, doesn't matter at all. Whether or not I get the wide nine or some other deer, I've got two wonderful kids at home. That's the stuff that really matters. They're healthy. That's the stuff that really matters. So I'm able to shake myself out of it a lot more quickly now. But still, I'm super goal oriented. So I do get in it, and that's why I love it. And then that's why sometimes I'm up till 2 in the morning, not able to sleep.
Yeah, even one of the opening frames is the spreadsheet where you're, the mad scientist, and I got a pretty good kick out of that. And so I encourage everyone to go watch it and see exactly what we're discussing. Now, with it being October right now, you mentioned, like I said, weather a lot. and also the October cold fronts of like these little
Mm.
small windows of opportunity. How much weight do you put into those as an opportunity, knowing that hypothetically it should get better as we get deeper into the season, but there's also a great window of opportunity, but maybe it's not as wide open or there's not as much margin of error as you get deeper into the season. What's your philosophy regarding that?
Yeah, so this is another one of those shifts. I used to be very much, first couple of days of the season and then the rut, and I used to be deathly afraid of the October lull, right?
Hmm.
And I have shifted on that just because I've seen it over and over and over again, where there can be great opportunities on October 8th or 12th or 16th or whatever it is. And if you sit around twiddling your thumbs throughout that whole month just waiting for the rut, you're just missing out on a lot of time in the
Season
tree.
feels really short.
Fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, the season's really short. And I've also found, even in some of these really high pressure hunting spots that I spend a lot of time in, the deer, often, at least the mature bucks that I usually hunt, they aren't as easy to push out of the area as I used to think. And this is something where I used to think, like, man, like if they smell me one time, they're gone. And what I have learned to be the case that's different than that is that oftentimes a buck doesn't get old where I hunt unless they have found a little spot where they feel pretty darn safe. They have developed a program that allows them to survive the huge number of hunters for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years. So they've tested this theory. Like they've got this theory, which is, hey, if I stay in this zone, I'm going to live. And it worked for them when they were 1.5, and it worked at 2.5, and it worked in 3.5, and it worked at 4.5. So by the time I'm hunting at 5.5, it's going to be really hard to convince that deer that he doesn't want to stick with what's kept him alive up to this point. So where in the past I thought, man, if you make one hunt in the middle of October and it goes bad, you're never going to see him. To where now, man, I realize like I've got to take some swings. If you're ever going to kill these deer, you can't stand on the outside looking in. You have to poke in there sometimes and take an aggressive move. And that does mean sometimes it's going to go wrong. And it's happened to me, and I have seen enough times now that if you make a few mistakes, you can still get second or third or fourth chances, because they don't want to leave these safe spots that they have. So as long as you're not repeatedly over and over and over and over again blasting away and blowing your wind into where they live and knocking on their bedroom door every single day, as long as you're not making a habit of that, if it's a handful of careful strikes when the conditions are right, you know, you can do it and then you have a better chance because of it. So, yeah, if, like, for example, there is a cold front hitting a few days, what's today? I don't know what
Today's
day.
the 8th.
Today's the 8th.
Today's Tuesday.
Tuesday the 8th. Okay. So I'm stuck here in Louisiana for this work trip. So I can't hunt right now. But I get back during the weekend. I would get back Friday night. There's a cold front hitting that weekend that's going to drop temperatures like 25 degrees from Friday to Sunday. So Sunday I can hunt, and it's going to be, like I said, dramatically cooler than it has been for much of the week ahead of it. So even though that's like October 12th or 13th, right in the middle of October, um, I'm looking at that as a very strong opportunity to go in there and do something, hunt one of these deer I'm after, poke in there after them, because that's a significant change, and deer do react to significant changes.
Mhm.
It's really hard to argue that, and so I do place value on them. I'm not going to hunt, October 13th the way I'm going to hunt on November 3rd. Like I'm not going to do 6 days straight all day in the best stuff. But I'm going to say, man, that's a special day. I'm going to go in there and make something happen.
So that's a great talking point. So what is your checklist? Like what this coming Sunday, where are you gonna hunt? Are you gonna hunt in the morning? Are you gonna hunt like give us your game plan and your thought process behind it.
Yeah. So I still prefer evenings over mornings in October until you get to like that last week or so. Not to say you can't kill them in the mornings, you definitely can. If I'm traveling for hunts, I'll hunt the mornings. But when I'm hunting my close to home spots in October, I tend to stick to the evening hunts until that period, unless there's like a screaming, waving flag that says you have to hunt me in the morning. You have to hunt me in the morning. And I say that, not to beat a dead horse, but the basic gist of it is like, right, a lot of times it's just hard to access morning locations without spooking deer. Oftentimes these bucks are already into their bedrooms when you're trying to slip in there, so you're spooking the deer, you're getting in there late. You are effectively going into a situation that's lower odds, but with a lot of risk. And then that hurts your opportunities in the evening when it's lower risk but higher odds. And so on October 13th or 12th or 14th, whatever it ends up being, that's probably what the situation is going to be. So I will be seeing this cold front coming in. And what I'm in a debate mode on right now is that there's one particular buck I'm after on one of my places I've hunted for a long time that I know pretty well. And this could be the trigger that gets him moving in daylight. He hasn't been as daylight recently. This might be the thing that sends him over the edge and gets me that opportunity. So I could hunt him. Or I've got some new permission on a tiny other property where I've got a buck that has been daylighting this week while I've been gone. And so it'll be, I'll be a little late to the game. But with that cold front, that should make it just that much better. Now that I can see with my cameras, he's been very comfortable in this little zone. And so I'm kind of thinking about going after him. So that's going to be a little bit different because it's a different kind of spot. It's going to require an aggressive kind of move to get this deer where I think I can. But I'll spell out the specific situation. There's a spot that I got permission on this summer that's very small as far as like huntable area. It's like a 60-acre property, but it's almost all just a big cornfield. There's just a little 4-acre sliver in the back of it that has some timber on the edge of a big swamp. And so I went out there this summer. I had one quick day to do a quick speed scout, get a sense of the area, hung 2 cameras, picked out a couple different places that I might be able to hunt the 2 best areas I found. One of the best areas I found was where this ditch, like an irrigation ditch of some kind, coming out, like, I guess not an irrigation ditch, but some kind of ditch came out of the swamp and T-junctured with the cornfield. And it stopped just before the field. So what you have is like this deep water-filled ditch that the deer do not want to jump across. And the first place they get to that they can easily get around this thing is right at the edge of the field. And so it's a major pinch point. It's just a spot where any deer coming along the edge of the swamp has to come out and around the ditch to get through there. And then it's also this spot where the best food source for this entire swamp system all comes to this cornfield, to this kind of narrowing of this field. The problem with it is that there's no good trees to hunt from. There's no good trees. And so when I was scouting on that one day, I right away saw this spot. I was like, oh, wow, this has got a lot of great qualities, but where the heck would I hunt? And what I realized is that probably the only way to hunt this spot is to actually just sit on the ground in the standing corn. And so I got in the corn and started looking around and finding like where might I have some lanes and just kind of figuring out how I might be able to shoot through this. And I picked a spot in the standing corn, marked the exact place I want to hunt in that corn, so that on this day when I'm going to go in there, I'm going to slip through the standing corn, walk all the way from the road down this field right to that location that I picked out, and I will know, okay, here I am. I have shooting lanes through a couple of these spots where fortunately the deer had been there so much in the summer they'd eaten down and busted down a lot of the corn stalks, so there's spots you can see through it. So I'm going to stand in the standing corn where there's this kind of pinch point of movement to food. So it's not like it would work in the rut. It's a rut pinch point too, but it's also an October pinch point because it's the spot where these deer coming out to feed naturally all get funneled through this narrowing of the terrain. And that's a spot where it's, again, being very small. I don't want to hunt this place a lot because I don't have like multiple backup options. I can't hunt all over the place. I have a spot, maybe 2 spots that would work here. So I've been waiting for either cameras to tell me that you should really be getting in there, or for conditions and cameras or time of year. And so in this case, if I was able to hunt right now, I'd probably be going right now because he was daylight yesterday morning and last night, and like 2 or 3 days before that. So he's very comfortable in there. But hopefully when I get home, the good weather, the good wind, all of that will continue to keep him active. And having waited and not hunted early in the season when he wasn't so much so, I can make this kind of aggressive on the ground push in there and maybe get a chance at him.
Okay, so what if you show up Sunday, the corn just got picked?
If the corn is picked, that is going to throw a big curveball into my plan. I think if that's the case, I would have to fall back to my plan B spot, which isn't that far from it because, again, it's just 4 acres. So there was an oak tree I found where there's a little patch of oaks about It's probably 60, 70 yards down that I could get into. And so that's the closest good tree I could get into to that zone. And there has been a big scrape right in this cluster of oaks. That is the other location that I have a camera that he has been hitting sometimes and pretty relatively frequently. And so it would get me in the zone. And I'm sure these deer are still going to be out there feeding on that corn, especially if it's just picked. So I won't have the pinch point factor to help me, but I will have good visibility. I will have the added benefit of this scrape right next to me. And worst case scenario, if he comes out to that cornfield, you'd hope for a little bit of maybe calling action, being able to close the distance from 70 yards to 30 or whatever it is. So
Mhm.
that's my first instinct, at least, because I don't know any other way I could hunt that spot in the ground without being in a very precarious wind position. That would be the big tricky thing.
And I assume too the wind. So what? So we don't know what. So we can guess what the wind's going to be doing on Sunday. But do you have your scent blowing back into the standing corn where your access was, or off to a side, or?
I planned on it blowing straight back into the field where my axis was.
Mhm.
So yeah, in this, if I were to be hunting, and I haven't looked to see what the wind's going to be Sunday, Monday, but yes, I would need wind blowing away from the swamp, either straight onto that field and hope I catch them before a bunch of deer get out there, or a little bit. It would be west, south, southwest. I could probably get away with too, but I wouldn't want northwest blowing into this zone where I'm guessing they're going to come out into the field.
Mhm. Yeah, well, I think that correlates well with the progression of the season, right? And also like very specific, somewhat aggressive, but very specific with a good plan, and not is like ho hum. It's November. I'm just going to go sit this spot because I feel good there. Which kind of ties back to the wide nine in terms of the risk versus reward, and also the forgiveness that comes along with this. Because I remember on that video in the film, you got busted by some does, and we all think like, "Oh my gosh, he heard those does blow, and it's over, or he's going to be gone for a week." And that was not the case, correct?
That's right. That evening, that this is one of the evenings that I thought I needed to take a strike because there was a cold front that pushed through. This is almost exactly a year to the date of what we're talking about now. It was like October 12th or 10th, I don't know, somewhere in that ballpark last year. And a cold front hit, and I had this same thought process in my mind, um, that let me take a step back. This is a good example of me becoming more adaptable because in the past I would have said I'm going to hunt them a couple times early and then I'm going to wait until that later part of the month. And he continued to tell me like, "Hey, hunt me." Like he kept showing up in daylight. I glassed him one evening after I'd said like I'm not going to hunt again, and then I glassed him up one night I could scout, and he was still moving in daylight. So then I was like, okay, I'll keep after it. This cold front hits, and I say, okay, with this good drop in temperatures, I'm going to push in tight to his bedroom, right where there's a bunch of oak trees dropping, like right on his doorstep. And so I slip in there. It was windy enough that I could get close without him or other deer in the area hearing me. And one of the biggest challenges with this particular area is this very high deer density. And so you see a lot of deer, which is fun. I enjoy seeing deer, but it makes it really, really hard not to get busted.
Yep.
You can almost never have a 100% safe wind direction. There's very few places where you are absolutely bulletproof. So sometimes I just have to know that. But to get into these best spots, you sometimes just have to go for it. And so this is one of those days where I had the best possible wind to go for it and enough wind that I could get close without a bunch of deer hearing me, and the cold temperatures that made me think that taking that risk would be worth it. And I loved the location so much with as you remember, last year was a heavy mass year, so there's tons of acorns, and I'm able to get in this spot where the most acorns are right next to his bed that I think he's in a lot of the times, with the perfect wind blowing kind of down off that bed behind me to the least likely, at least, spot where these deer could go, other deer could go. So I go in there, I push in tight to the bedroom on, pretty early in October, and I felt good. Like I felt really good about everything. And then, as you saw, there they go blowing, and it's even worse than the video showed. A lot of stuff has to get cut, just doesn't make the cut, or we didn't get film of it. But not only were some does blowing, but another 3 or 4 year old buck actually popped out there and started blowing too, and he wouldn't leave. So there was a nice deer that just stood there, I don't know, 150 yards away or 100 yards away, and just repeatedly kept blowing. And so I just thought, oh my gosh, this is an absolute nightmare. Like I just destroyed this place. And that evening, like when I was talking to the camera, I was like, I am out of here. I'm not coming back for at least a week or two. I screwed this up pretty bad, but maybe 2 weeks from now, or maybe 10 days from now, or whatever, things will calm down and I'll be able to get a crack at him. And then the next day I get my camera pictures and it showed that, I don't know, 15 minutes after that happened, the Y9 shows up in daylight on another spot, not that far away, like close
Mhm.
enough that he certainly could have heard it, or was in the realm of possible influence. So either he just came from a different direction and didn't hear it, or he did. And deer blow at a lot of things a lot of the time, and sometimes I think we over attribute stuff to that. Like it's gonna freak out everything in the world, and they're gonna know, oh, that doe blowing over there means Mark's in the tree. I'm not gonna come out for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
You probably can't live like that because they would never move anywhere.
Yeah.
So yeah, I get these pictures. He's moving in daylight after all that commotion, and it was just another reminder of like, hey, you can't get stuck in your own preconceived notions. Like I had this plan, like, okay, I'm going to back out, no more. I screwed it up because of these beliefs that I had. But then all of a sudden, like the deer does something different. And so something that I keep on getting better at kind of interpreting is what the deer are telling you. And if the deer are telling you that, hey, we're still comfortable, or hey, we're still here, then it's okay to break the rules. I used to be a rule follower. I used to be well, if Johnny Eberhart said you have to do it this way, then dang it, I better do it that way. Or if Mark Drury said they only move on this day or that day, or if this article I read 20 years ago said this, then that's what you have to do. And that was a great starting point for me. That was a great way to learn some basic fundamentals, but you have to eventually let your own experience and intuition and circumstances layer on top of that. And so now, over the last 20 years or whatever it's been, I've gotten to the point where now I know how to read what the deer are telling me myself. And sometimes that means breaking conventional wisdom or breaking your own plan to do so.
Yeah. It's definitely something that just comes with experience, and I feel like some people have that natural instinct better than others too, I really do, and I don't know if they necessarily have that instinct better, but they might have squirrel hunted more when they were younger, or they might have rabbit hunted more when they were younger, or,
Sure.
like, I feel like it's definitely just a earned trait, and I think that we all have our own gut feelings, and then we let our brain override them of like, well, but like my gut says this, but according to so and so or this, that, the other, like that wouldn't work.
Right.
And I'm just a big like, you got to follow your gut. And I have friends I say that to, and they get so annoyed by it. But it's like that's what you have to do. Like
Yeah.
I can't jump in your brain and have all the little nuanced things and say, oh, this is it. This is how you do it. Like we have the most information in our own mind, and we have to follow your own intuition, which is
Yeah.
hard, really hard to do.
Hard. It's hard.
So as the season progresses, right? Which another thing too is having a cameraman throughout this process too. Like obviously you've hunted by yourself many, many, many years. Like how much does that like maybe limit or does it make it more enjoyable? Like how much does that factor into strategy, location, access, twice the noise? You got to have two good trees or one really good tree with like how much do you feel like that limited the process throughout this too? And if you don't want to talk about it too, I get it too, but I have
Oh,
to ask.
no, we can definitely talk about it. It didn't influence things too much, but that's because I was really picky about who was going to film me for this particular hunt, because I just knew it would be a hunt where we would have to do a lot of mobile hunting. We'd have to be very nimble. And so for a lot of the stuff we do with MeatEater, we hire a guy for a week. And it's like, all right, we're doing a week hunt. And this camera guy is booked for that week, and it's going to be whoever's available. For this kind of hunt, when I decided that this last year I was going to film my local hunts, I said, like, that's just not going to work. I can't tell you that this 7 days is when I'm going to be able to hunt this deer. I need to be able to have the flexibility to hunt, as we've just talked about, like when the moments are right, when these special opportunities are there. So number one, I had to have someone who would be available on that kind of flexible schedule. And then number two, I just really had to have somebody that would be dialed when it comes to this style of mobile kind of ninja like hunting, where we're just slipping in, slipping out, going up and down trees and saddles in the middle of the dark, whatever it is. So luckily, my right hand man Charlie Williams is a guy who can hang. Like he can do all that stuff. He's got the know-how of when to move, when not to move. He can get up any tree. He can get high in a tree. So I trusted that he could do his part. So you have to be a little bit, picking the right tree is a little different because you do need to find something that can keep both of you hidden. Um, but that interestingly never became a major issue until the night that I got a shot at the wide nine with my bow, and that didn't make it into the cut either. But on that particular evening, as you know from the story, like there's a thing that happens in the morning, and then I have to like pivot, make a big pivot for the evening hunt. And for the evening hunt, I had to figure out like how do I react now to what just happened this morning? How do I make the best of the situation? And based on the history with this deer and what I know about the area, I had strong intuition that, man, if there's anywhere he'd still feel comfortable and he'd do the things that bucks want to do at this time of year, it's going to be here. So I go to here with Charlie that evening, and this is a spot that I had not previously like had a best tree picked or had something prepared or anything. This is going to be a run and gun, setting up in a new spot kind of place. And there just was not a tree that I felt like me and him could get away with it. So I spent, it might have been pushing an hour going like this tree, this tree, this
Oh, yeah.
tree, and
Yeah.
then I don't think so. Maybe we had to walk over here. So then I walked like 40 yards this way, but it was like, October 30th, and not a lot of wind, so it was a little bit. I was worried about noise, so we would like just painstakingly go 30 yards to look at this tree and its setup, and it'd be like, this tree might work, but there's poison ivy everywhere on it, and I get horrible poison ivy. It's like I can't do that one. And so it was just like a nightmare trying to get that one tree that would give you just enough cover. Um, but long story short, in many cases, it definitely does make it more challenging because you get, like you said, twice the people up there, twice the noise, twice the setup time. That's the setup time is dramatic. So I just have to add time to everything. So if maybe I was gonna say I want to be getting ready to head out at 6 when it's with a camera guy, so maybe we better be ready to go at 5. Everything takes longer. Everything's gonna be slower. You have to be twice as careful with noise, twice as careful with the wind. Um, but luckily, having someone like Charlie who can do it helps.
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
Yeah, for sure. And so you mentioned, we'll talk about the most agonizing day in the whitetail woods, as you said, uh, and for good reason. It was really tough. I felt bad for you watching
that did.
that. And so you set up in the morning based off of like where you got told you and everything else. And so the wind was shifting, and this is something else that I feel like everyone at some point has been in that boat of like, do I just get down? Do I? And so you made the decision that you were getting down, and in that process the buck would have did present a shot, but you weren't ready. What can you say about that? Because it's like you obviously. Do you think the wind was shifting at that time, and you had more margin of error than you thought initially, or do you think the Bucks just didn't care, or what? Walk us through that because I was watching that. I was trying to put everything together. And you're like, if I had an arrow knocked, he would have been dead.
Yeah. So what happened was that the day before I had seen him locked on a doe in this area. And so I made a move for the afternoon, got as close as I could get to this little patch of cover that him and this doe had gone into. Um, and the way the wind was going to be for the morning of this current hunt then was it was supposed to cut right down the edge of this bedding area thicket and skirt it. And I thought most of the activity would be to my east and north, and I could get away with the wind blowing down the edge, kind of paralleling it. But I get there, I start hunting, and what was supposed to be, I guess it would have been it should have been like a north, almost a due north wind, ended up being more of a northwest wind. And I kept getting gusts that pushed it more to the west, until it was like mostly a northwest wind. And then I was getting more gusts, and then it was like a west northwest wind. And as I sat there throughout the morning, I kept on debating back and forth, like, geez, this is getting bad, or this could be bad. Gosh, this is where like all the deer are going to end up once they're back to bed. And if he's still in there, or if he goes back there, like I don't know if this is going to work. And it kept getting worse and worse to the point where I got to, this is bad. And I've always historically been the person, not always, but I would be very afraid to get down during prime time and get out of there. So I would have been the person that would say, "Well, I'm here. I'll just ride it out and see what happens." But I remember thinking that morning, like, the right thing to do. Like, as the wind got worse and worse and worse, pushing more and more into there, and I just kept thinking through, okay, in what scenario does this work? Like, in what scenario does this not work? And I couldn't see many scenarios in which this would work, because this is where all of the deer are going to be or are now, and I'm going from being on the edge of it to worse and worse and worse and worse and worse, to the point where it feels like I was really going to be ruining the main place I was trying to hunt this entire week. Like, this was the spot that he was going to be, and if my wind is blowing straight into that for 4 hours, I just didn't know how that could possibly be something I could recover from quickly during my one best window. And so I decided, to walk the walk, basically. Like, the right thing to do. Yeah, it's going to be inconvenient. Yeah, it's going to be nerve wracking because they might show up. But, you've hunted this deer days and days and days, and he's never shown up yet. And, in this kind of situation, what are the odds that this one time you decide to pull down, he's going to show up? And it's the right thing to do. If you're smart and you play it smart and you hunt him the right way, you can get a crack at him eventually. Don't be lazy here. I remember just telling myself, like, kind of all the things we're talking about. Like, I have to be aggressive in this moment to fix the problem. And I'm going to be
Hmm.
aggressive, and I know how to do this. I can do this, and this is the right thing to do. So it sucked, but I felt like it was the right thing to do in the situation. And so me and Charlie are talking, and we're making the plan. Like, all right, let's just tear down as fast as we possibly can. Like, get out of here as quickly as we can so we don't get caught with our pants down. And as I'm doing all this stuff, I am trying to look around, do stuff, look around, look around. But it was very windy and raining that day, so you couldn't hear anything at all. So it was just visibility. Just looking was the only way you could tell there was a deer there. And to make a long story short, if I need to remember here is, I think I was partway to getting my bow down. I even think, like, I think I was bringing the bow down when I looked over my shoulder again and saw him crossing the ditch from behind me. And
Oh
so
no.
he was coming from behind me, directly behind me, and coming right towards my shooting lane. So I had time to get the bow. I remember having time to get an arrow knocked. And interestingly, I had whispered to Charlie, I'm like, Charlie, he's right here. Charlie, he's right. Get ready, get ready. And he never heard any of it. So Charlie's packing the whole time. So that's why there's not a whole lot of footage of this scene, because he kept on packing. And I am, meanwhile, panicking, getting my bow out. I get an arrow knocked. I'm about to try to draw on him. And I'm, Charlie, you want him? And then Charlie at this point realized, like, holy shit, why is Mark's bow back up in his hand? And so he turns, all of a sudden sees this is happening. The deer is approaching the shooting lane. And this had all happened in, I don't know, 10 seconds, 12 seconds, something like that. And then I saw that my bow rope was still tied to the top of my
Oh
cam.
no. Oh no.
And so this didn't make the cut, but my bow rope was on top of my cam. So I'm like, oh no, like, I can't do this. So then I had to get this thing off of the cam. And by the time all that happens, he had came through my shooting lane and he got to where that wind was. So he came from way upwind. And so the footage you see in the film is of him when he crosses past me and then hits the wind. And you can see him, like, kind of turn and get a little
Yeah.
wiggy and then trot off. Um, and so I never got to take a crack, and it was right there.
Yeah, and so you mentioned you re-strategize, go to different spots, struggle to find a tree, and then you call them in and 40 yards,
Yeah.
and it's like this film is like the most relatable emotional roller coaster that I think almost every hunter can relate to. And so you shoot and it looks like, it's in the shoulder region, and like then you start doing the mental gymnastics and like try to frame of like what you thought happened, and like you obviously hope that it was a good, clean, ethical shot, but like there's not much penetration. And so and he ducked the air. That's what happened. Like he ducked the string pretty heavily, and so like I think it was on when we put you through the gauntlet. This was probably a couple years ago. I think we asked like the max shooting range, and it was like right at, I think you said like 40 yards, and this was
Yeah.
40 yards.
Yep.
Has that range shrunk, or would you still take another 40-yard shot?
Yeah. No, I have this year decided to join the 30-yard pin and in club.
Okay.
Um, yeah, because the last 2 seasons, I have had like 5 different deer jump my string on shots from like 35 to 40 yards. And his resulted in that shoulder hit, resulted in another deer getting hit in the high lung, where it's like, gosh, I don't know if it was going to be good or not. Had another deer that spun on the shot a lot and resulted in a hit farther back than I would have liked. I spined a doe like 3 years ago in that kind of situation. And so that was enough. Uh, I don't know what you call it. It was enough things to say, like, okay, this isn't working very well. I need to shift things. And my biggest epiphany coming out of last season was that I've gotten to a point in my hunting life where I would rather have fewer bad things happen than more good things happen. So by that I mean, like, I am okay reducing my chances of opportunity. So I'm going to shrink my range in, and I'm going to do more things that maybe will result in me getting less deer in the end, possibly, because I'm not going to take as many shots. But if that reduces my chances of wounding a deer again or missing a deer again, I would much rather have that, because like the low I feel when I wound a deer, if you imagine this is my baseline and I wound a deer, my low is like way, 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 way down here on the floor. And if I get a deer, my high is like up here. So I would much rather get rid of the bad stuff than get more of the good stuff. So I'm reducing my range. I'm making a number of different changes to try to be building a safety net, I guess. So just trying to reduce any of these little tiny margin of error things. And I would rather push myself to be a better hunter and get closer to deer than risk bad situations. So that's where I am this year, where I plan on being for a while.
Mm-hmm. Did you end up? Obviously, you end up tagging the buck. Did you end up seeing exactly kind of where you hit him, or like? Because I was reading the comments, and that was one of the most common questions that people had was like, "What was the autopsy?" Right?
Yeah, so it was high shoulder blade, and it broke the shoulder bone, but did not penetrate through it. And it ended up healing on the outside. Like the hide was kind of healed over, but as soon as I like rubbed around there, it like reopened, and it was very infected in there, and like a gnarly infection that was spread down from the shoulder down like the side. So it wasn't doing well. And I was using an expandable and long shot, 40-yard shot. So yeah, I mean, if it had been like an inch
Yeah.
to the back, an inch further back, he would have been double lunged. But
Yeah.
he wasn't. So
Yeah. He moved.
yeah.
Gosh. Yeah. All right. The 30 pin and end or in. What was that phrase? I've never heard of that
Uh,
phrase.
the 30-yard pin and in club.
Okay.
So 30
Okay.
yards and in
Okay.
um,
Okay.
is the new club I started. So if you want to join, anybody wants to join is welcome to.
I like it. Yeah. I think we're always tempted to, because like you watch a Tim Wells or you watch a Josh Bomar or you watch a John Dudley. Obviously, those guys are excellent shots with a lot of experience.
Mhm.
I'm not one of those guys. But it's tempting because you're in your yard and you're shooting like, oh yeah, 60 yards is really easy. 70 yards is pretty easy. 80, oh, I really noticed when I messed up my form. And I think that maybe sometimes we think we have more, and I think we sometimes think we have more archery skills than what we really do, especially when you throw in the moment of truth and pressure and adrenaline and elevated heart rate and high
And how
stakes.
much these deer move. I
That
mean,
too.
deer move and whitetails move a lot. And the other thing is, we see these people on TV take these long shots and we see them kill some deer. I know, I'm not saying like specific people, but I know there's a whole lot of people that we see on TV that miss deer and wound deer that you never see on their episodes.
Hmm.
And I, you know, I don't want to have one good kill and two bad ones that nobody sees. I want to make sure that it's a bunch of really good, clean, ethical kills as much as I possibly can. So I'm going to stick with those close shots, reduce error, and I think that's going to at least help me sleep better at night.
Yeah, that's perfect timing as things ramp up and things get crazier for hunters that'll be faced that exact moment of truth, right? That exact moment of truth will happen sometime this season for you again. There's going to
Yeah,
be a buck at 37 and a half yards, and you're going to hopefully say no, or maybe you feel. I mean, it's going to happen. It happens every
yeah,
single season.
yeah, yeah. And you can't take an arrow back. right?
Yeah.
When you send it, you are stuck with that decision. And I can't speak for anyone else, but there's just nothing worse than the feeling I have when it goes wrong. And I just don't want that feeling anymore. I don't want to do that.
Yeah, that's a great point. And so as the season progresses, that was October 30th, you said, and then it was funny like watching the like the key days, right, that we all wait for, and it's like nope, nothing on the 6th, oh, nothing on the 7th, oh, nothing on the 8th. Is he dead? Is he alive? What happened? Did someone else kill him? And eventually you do get confirmation of life that the deer is alive, and so like kind of like accelerating things here, I found it really interesting. You glassed that buck in the morning, and then it was like a mini Western hunt, is what it felt like when I was watching that. Like, oh, we glassed him in the morning, we put him to bed, and now let's get our crap together and go put a stock on him.
Yeah. I mean, it was not at all how I would have expected it to go. But when I saw that that was where he was, and I saw that he was limping and, not doing great, um, it all just kind of, you could just see like, this is my chance. I don't know if I'll ever see him again. I don't know if how good he's doing, if he's doing really poorly, if he's doing okay. I don't know if he's been here all along. I don't know where he's going tomorrow, but I know where he is right now, and I have to end this thing. Like I felt like this, like a twofold responsibility. Like one, this is a deer I've been trying to get all year, and I've been pursuing for multiple years, 4 years of history. So there's that whole thing, and then there's this second obligation, which is, geez, I wounded this deer. Now he's suffering because of me. He's obviously not doing great. I want to like put this thing to an end as best as I possibly can. So I had this like, it just felt like a weight almost. Like this was it.
Hmm.
And when I saw that, saw where he bedded down there, because he just kind of was standing in this one spot in this tall grass that's getting a little bit more light, and he disappears, kind of lays down there, and I just was like, okay, I got to figure out how to do this, like how to kill this deer. And at first I was thinking like, do I have to try to like stalk in on him, like on the ground in that tall grass, and like try to work up on him and get close enough to shoot him in his bed there somehow? But then I was really worried about the height of this grass, because I knew this is a very tall, grassy field, and stuff I've done around there, like, gosh, like right where he was, like, would I even be able to see his vitals at all? I was worried that I wouldn't. Excuse me. So I debated back and forth on how to approach this, and finally settled on trying to use this adjacent hillside to my advantage. The problem with the hillside was that it was an open cut cornfield. And the only way to get to a position that I thought I would be able to see down to him better and actually have an angle where I could see the vitals would be to get like, I don't know, 300, 400 plus yards down this cornfield and then above him. But how do you do that without him seeing you, was what I was worried about, because I didn't know like what's his setup, where he's bedded. Is he in a position where he can see this hillside or not? So I just tried to be as careful as I possibly could. And the video doesn't convey this because you just can't accurately show this. But I mean, I can't remember exactly, but it might have been between 1 and 2 hours of crawling. I mean, we crawled and crawled and crawled, and mostly it was like snaking on my belly. Like the footage that's shown in the video, I'm on all fours. That was at the very beginning. And then I was like, he's going to see us. We have to be lower. So then we were literally on our bellies, like caterpillar, like scooching. And then I had my backpack on my back, and then I was worried like he's going to see my backpack, so I can't do that. So I had to take my backpack off, and I would slide my backpack off and then like shimmy up, slide my backpack, and then shimmy. And that was for the first like 300, 400 yards to go down with the rows. But then I had to go cross rows to get to be able to see over the lip of the hill to where he was. So then I'm trying to crawl across frozen corn stalks, and that ended up being way harder than I thought it would be, because they were frozen like spears sticking out of the
Yeah.
ground 8 or 10 inches. And so the way I figured out to do this was that I would lay parallel to them, and I literally rolled over the corn stalks to get over them. So I'm literally rolling slowly down the hill, and my camera guy was having to do the same thing. So he couldn't film any of this. But it was the most absurd thing. And then at one point, I brought a white bed sheet, because again, I'm worried about getting spotted. So I slung a white bed sheet over me at one point to try to stay hidden when we became more exposed on the side of that hill. And I was just so paranoid. Like, gosh, if all of this is lining up here, I know where he is, and then he sees us and runs away. Who knows? Like, this is the first time I've seen him in almost 4 weeks after everything that happened. I just have to do everything I possibly can. So we did this really ridiculous several hour crawl slash roll slash scooch, and finally got into a position where I thought we could see where I was pretty sure he was. I tried to identify um, where like two different colored grass and weeds come together. I was like, I'm pretty sure like where this like light colored patch meets these tall weeds. That's where he is. And I had tried to like mentally. I even took a picture with my phone so that I would remember what it looked like from the view where I'd seen him last. And then I get back to this hillside and I'm looking down and I'm trying to identify, okay, is that the right light colored patch and the dark patch? And I'm looking at the phone and looking at what I'm seeing in person and trying to make sure I'm positioned in the right location. But I got to the spot where I was pretty sure we could see his general zone, and searched and searched and searched and couldn't spot him while he was bedded down. So we just waited and hoped that he would stand up and be in a place where I'd be able to take a shot, or that he might move into position, or something, because I just had no idea what would happen if we didn't get it done that night.
And it all came together.
It did. It did.
Man. Yeah. I just encourage everyone to go watch it because it's extremely relatable for someone that has been through like the ups and downs of an entire season. And it's great that, there's a great ending that it all comes together because it doesn't always necessarily work out that way.
No.
But I think there's just so many key lessons in there, like little things that I think would resonate with a lot of people. Like, don't be lazy, do the right thing, like follow your gut, know when to strike. Like, it's all these things that are really easy to say, but when you're faced with the decision, it's not as easy.
Yeah.
And I think that just comes with time, like you mentioned.
Yeah. And then just getting out there and doing this stuff enough times to see it with your own eyes. And I think one thing a lot of newer hunters maybe could get tripped up on is when someone like you or I talks about waiting to strike, right? Not going and hunting on the wrong times or the wrong days and the wrong places. And they use that as an excuse not to hunt at all. I
Mhm.
think that would be a mistake. I think especially when you're in the earlier days, earlier years of trying to figure this stuff out, hunt a lot. Be careful about when you hunt certain spots. Like, don't blindly hunt your best spots over and over again. But when the times aren't right for that best spot, don't just go sit at home. If you've got a weekend hunt, go hunt somewhere. Go on a different property. Go on public land. Go somewhere else. Get that experience. Have those learning opportunities. Just be selective about when you strike in those places that you absolutely know best, or you feel have a specific time when they're going to be the best. Um, don't not hunt at all, because just being out there is why we hunt in the first place. We want to be out there in the elements, experiencing this stuff, seeing nature, seeing deer. That's how you learn. And sometimes you'll get surprised too. So hunt a lot, gain that experience yourself. As much as hopefully like a conversation like this will help, there's nothing that can replace real in the field experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think to your point, it can be uh, paralyzing. Like, oh, like it's this condition, or like, no, I shouldn't hunt. But like to your point, you're missing that person's advice of 20 years of experience that has been able for them to refine that.
Yeah.
And I don't think you can. I really don't think you can cheat that. I just don't think there's no. I don't think there's any shortcuts. I think you could listen to every podcast ever. You could talk to those people. You could give them. They could have a hotline, right? And you call them. I think you'd be more effective, but you still can't cheat the process.
Yeah. Yeah. You can certainly learn some things. You can speed it up a little bit, but nothing will replace you actually getting out there and trying to apply yourself.
Hmm. Absolutely. Well, really appreciate your time and breaking down like behind the scenes in terms of the audio experience of that.
Yeah.
I really appreciate you doing that. If people want to go watch that film or tune into what you have going on, where can they go watch that? Because it's just like the perfect timing to go watch that as the season ramps up.
Yeah, man. It's over on the MeatEater YouTube channel. It's called The 4 Year Hunt for the Wide Nine, I think is what it's called, or something like that. But yeah, go to the MeatEater YouTube channel. You'll see something about the Wide Nine there. I'm really proud of it. It's the biggest like feature film I've ever done when it comes to a deer hunt, and I really tried hard to effectively, have a film that really puts you into it emotionally, and you feel that roller coaster. So I'm really happy with how it turned out, and hope people learn something from it, enjoy it, and hopefully are inspired to get out there and give it a shot themselves. So that's where to find the film. And then, of course, there's the Wired to Hunt podcast, and that's both on the MeatEater Podcast Network YouTube channel and anywhere podcasts are available.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate Is there any exciting projects you can say that you're working on for this year that we can look forward to in 25 in terms of
Yeah.
media projects?
Well, yeah, I'd say the one thing that's a little off the wall is I did an Alaskan deer hunt, which is new for me, and that's a really cool film that we're working on now that'll be coming out next year, as well as a couple new whitetail films, um, some public land, some private land, some more local Michigan stuff. So there's going to be kind of a sequel to the Wide Nine on the way
Mm,
as well. So we'll see how I
mm.
follow it up.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Jake.